brought in 3,000, count them, 3,000 bad guys. I'm talking about the worst murderers. He got 3,000 of them, killed 14. All of who the Lone Ranger became when you saw him on TV was actually the life of Bass Reeves.
African people, in many ways, the Underground Railroad established African people moving west and establishing places to be able to protect them. And so in the study and the research of the Underground Railroad, you will find that there are African-American communities that were established and have been there from before people can actually talk about it historically.
Many people don't realize that African-American people founded and settled many cities around the country. Buffalo, New York was founded by a black man. They called him Black Joe Hodges. Many African-American people had a less volatile relationship with the Native Americans. A lot of the European settlers, they were beefing with the Native Americans. So they couldn't go into certain areas peacefully. But a lot of African-American settlers would go in there and they had somewhat of a camaraderie with the Native American people. In Los Angeles, 44 African-American families came to Los Angeles and founded Los Angeles. The governor of what was then known as Alta, California, which is now the state of California, the governor was a man of African descent named Pio Pico. And there's a street out here in Los Angeles called Pico Boulevard named after him. You had an African-American woman named Biddy Mason, who was a very wealthy landowner in early Los Angeles. So African-American people were very prominent in founding many cities around America.
Chicago was a city founded by Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable, a brother of Haitian background coming up through and founding this city at Chicago, because that is what the indigenous people called it in this part of Illinois. Now, Seneca Village really is a misnomer for Senegal Village. Seneca Village was a community in New York City that was purchased by freed Africans. When the enslavement of African people was abolished in 1827, Senegal Village became a meeting place for African people in general. The backstory, it is believed that Senegal Village became part of the Underground Railroad for African peoples. Starting in 1855, you're going to have people start to call it a shanty town, where people who are squatters live. They're going to demean the importance of Senegal Village. Going to say, you see all these African people moving up in here, and they're squatters, they don't belong there, and we need to create a park. And so they begin to put themselves upon the people. Finally, the mayor signs an edict saying, eminent domain, you got to get out. And so by 1857, the last Africans were forcibly removed from their homes.
What's interesting about Central Park, it was once an African-American community, Seneca Village, and now there's an ancient African monument. There's an obelisk in Central Park right now that's from ancient Africa, from ancient Kemet, and a lot of people don't even realize it's there.
A lot of people think that the enslavement of African people was only down south. That's not true. The largest plantation in the 13 colonies at one point in history was in Brooklyn, New York. And you know that area down there, down by Battery Park, where they used to bring the ships into that area, the port. And they would dock the ships, and they would bring the Africans up out the ships, and they would walk them across to be sold. However, what they did was, because they couldn't sell all of them, they used to put them in different prisons along this particular path. And then they would march the Africans that they were ready to sell down the street, down a street called Wall Street, down into a place we today call the New York Stock Exchange. African people were the first stocks and bonds sold on the stock exchange. There's a movie by Bruce Willis that will show you the prisons that are underground the stock exchange building.
Wiley Jones was a former African-American slave who went into Arkansas. He stacked his money up and he became a railroad owner. He owned a railroad system, and the city of Pine Bluff, Arkansas ended up buying his railroad system, and that system is still owned by Pine Bluff right now. The Patterson Car Company was a car company founded by former slaves, African-American men, and the Patterson Car Company was the first African-American car manufacturer in the country, I think the only manufacturer in the country. And what's interesting about the Patterson Car Company, it was in Ohio. their cars were considered higher quality than the Model T cars that Henry Ford had.
The DeRay brothers, Ford and them stole it. That's why all over the world, Ford never gets credit for inventing a car. He gets credit for mass production.
The cars began coming off the assembly line at the rate of 1 every 40 seconds.
Until that, they take one car and put it together. One car and put it together. But where did he get that from? George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver was never around black folks till he went to Tuskegee. The mother and father died or was killed. And a white family adopted him from Iowa. You know, black folks in Iowa, except football players. So he went to grade school, high school, and they didn't have no secondary school. They didn't have enough people. And so now George Washington Carver leaves after he get all this education come out there. He goes to Tuskegee. Henry Ford came down to visit, like he always see his friend. And he said, Mr. Ford, I got something here. Study plants. And see, if you take this back and give it to your engineers, they can build more than one car at a time. He took it back. Mass production all over the world is called the plant, right?
Everybody made joke of him because they said, well, you know, but the plants are talking to him? You know, is this how he's getting these properties of these plants? And George Washington Carver, in his quiet, dignified way, said, well, who taught me? I'm not saying that they talk to me like they got a tongue, but I can look at a plant and see what it can do for the human family.
The military came to George Washington Carver, and they said, we need you to do something for us. Can you invent something that out of it we can get paint, glue, ink, and plastic? Yeah, I can handle that. They tell me how smart black folks are. I can handle it. So he came back, called soybean. Now you want to hear something funny? The #1 cancer group in America is vegetarians. Because you wasn't supposed to eat soy. When he got to Tuskegee, they thought he was gay. No association with women, high-pitched voice, they thought he was gay.
The finest use we've been able to make of peanuts is in the treatment of the after effects of infantile paralysis.
And he'd rather for you to believe he was gay than tell you that them white folks that adopted him castrated him so he couldn't have sex with their daughter. Like, who wanted them, huh? Did you see King Kong, New York City, Empire State Building? That's about Jack Johnson and the white ladies. Why would the gorilla go to New York? They ain't got no bananas, and Lord knows ain't no trees. Why did they go there? The boxing capital of the world is Madison Square Garden. If you don't know how to break it down, you...
Johnson controlling the pace of the fight.
We have to understand that in our celebration of Jack Johnson and that one-on-one, mano a mano, man, this is you and me, and this is what we're going to deal with. There were lynchings the day after every fight. And that's very important to understand as it relates to the psychology. He used to love to drive. He used to love the speed. And he'd be speeding someplace, and the police would stop him. And because they saw that he was a person of African descent, because they saw the car that he was driving, some may have known who he was, but they said, well, what this man got doing with this car? They would fine him. They say, okay, we're going to give you a ticket for speeding. Here's a $500 ticket. $500 for speeding back then? Story has it, he'd give him $1,000. He said, because I'm speeding back.
In the sport of boxing, there has always been a need for the great white hope in boxing. Since there could not be one in real life, Hollywood just created one, and that's what the Rocky movies were about.
They were giving out the awards, and Rocky won, okay, the Oscar. And Muhammad Ali came out, and he was the one that gave Sylvester Stallone the award.
But can't you see I'm working?
I'm the real Apollo, please. You stole my script.
And Ali, in his most powerful way, came out and said, you know that story was about me. He said, you know that was about me. You know that y'all dream about beating a black man. He said, but you know what? The only place you'll ever do it is in Hollywood.